I can start it now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Harling. I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities, and this is my favorite event. The book talks are just the best. It's wonderful to be hosting another one tonight, the last of the fall semester, but we have an exciting spring lineup in store for you as well in due course. Right over there, yeah. But enough of me. I want to introduce the personage who will be introducing the real personage of the evening. And the introducer is Alex Hernandez, who, of course, as I think almost all of us probably know, is assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy, whose work lies at the intersection of philosophy and literature. Her research engages questions in the areas of animal ethics, moral psychology, American pragmatism, and feminist philosophy, and she's actually a fellow at the Center for the Humanities this year and gave a really super draft chapter of her book manuscript, so it'll be really exciting to watch the development of that. Keep your eyes, watch this space for that book in progress. Without any further ado, Alex, please.
So thanks everybody for being here. Nice to see lots of familiar faces, and of course thank you, Simon, for allowing me to introduce your book. Simon, it's been a pleasure, engaging it and reading with it. So what can I say about Simon Evnine's A Certain Gesture, Evnine's Batman meme project, and its Parerga? And now, just by the way, I will eventually get to introducing Simon, but I'm going to do a whole introduction of the book first to get to Simon. Okay, so first, what can I say about this book? First, this is a book that thinks intensively about the image and how different instances of a meme can acquire a multiplicity of meanings depending on the context in which it is made, appreciated, and shared. One of the book's philosophical contributions is that, like words, memes have acquired the status of symbols that, through their multiple replications or instantiations, express a collective mood, political attitudes, as well as values. Like the meanings of words, the meanings of memes change over time. So memes are vehicles for the contagious spreading, right, of political attitudes, misinformation, and in-group, out-group thinking. All this is true. But what Simon Evnine tells us about memes, what's different about them, is that they allow users to challenge the dominant uses of memes by affording users the possibility of weaving their own stories into them. And as Evnine shows us, we users have not only the capacity but the authority to determine what a meme means to us in a more flexible and restrictive manner than language. The meme is flexible, and its meaning is not determined by an object or an idea, but by human experience. As such, the medium can be and is often appropriated to challenge normative ways of thinking about the world, to flaunt public opinion, to express countercultural ideas, to represent queer experience, and to communicate an emotion or a personal experience very quickly, much more quickly at any rate than an essay or a novel, right? Second, this is a book intended as a slap to philosophy and academia, where author is the subject, narrator, and editor all at once. He's both a cultural producer and a critic, both Batman slapping Robin and Robin being slapped by Batman. So this is all happening at the same time. As a professional philosopher of language, metaphysics, including the metaphysics of artifacts, social ontology, and the nature of us persons, as well as the philosophy of art, Evnine is perhaps best poised to step back and think about philosophical method, about how to do philosophy, and perhaps how we might find alternative modes of discourse that challenge and perhaps blur or even dismantle some of the disciplinary silos that we are currently encouraging, currently encouraging over-specialization and preventing collaboration and crossovers with other disciplines. The book is timely during a time when disciplinary ways of thinking through a question has been replaced by thinking by means of abstract concepts whose depths have dropped out. These concepts have become annoying, pesky placeholders, very much like the endless strings of memes that appear on our social media feeds, that do the thinking for us. Employing irony and humor, the book is quite hilarious and often demanding and quite challenging to read. Evnine's A Certain Gesture deconstructs and systematically thinks through the assumptions that we take on when we do philosophy or theory in a siloed way. Now, finally, this is the last point I'll make. The book is not merely a diagnosis of academia's and especially philosophy's knowledge-making practices, but it is also prescriptive to the extent that it offers alternatives to disciplinary normativity. The book is scholarly yet queer, thoroughly abstract and theoretical, and yet embodied and personal, sharing a common origin with autotheory, or a method of writing that intertwines philosophy and theory with an author's lived experience. The kind of embodied philosophy that Evnine does in the book dismantles and challenges from the ground up how higher education organizes our collective experience. But it also emphatically shows us a different way of organizing our personal and social experience. It resists being used as theory. It does not propose a philosophical method, rather promotes the value of imaginative writing and associative rather than logical or argumentative forms of thinking, which is how most of us think outside of academia anyway. And it potentially authorizes others outside of academia to think creatively and philosophically in a way that is personally meaningful. Finally, it illustrates to the reader that philosophy can be valuable not merely as a means for deconstructing arguments and assessing the quality and validity of a claim, but also as a means of working out who we are and our place in the world. Without further ado, here is Simon Evnine. He's going to be talking to us about his book.
Thank you so much, Alex. Lovely introduction, and what a pleasure it is to be so well understood. And thank you, Phil, for making this possible, and Books for hosting it, and of course to everybody here for being here. So yes, I'm going to be talking about this book that I published recently, which looks like this. And it's quite hard to describe the book succinctly. I created over 100 memes using the well-known image of Batman slapping Robin. Okay, no more sound effects after this. And then I wrote commentaries on each of the memes, as if I, the commentator, were not the creator of the memes. So presenting them as an editor or curator might present a body of artworks with critical commentary on them. And the commentaries range over a wide variety of subjects, principally philosophy, psychoanalysis, and Judaism, but they also incorporate a lot of self-writing. Sometimes that's obvious and sometimes it's not. And of course a lot of it is done third-personally because the editor is talking about the author of the memes as if it were another person, as if he were another person. And I'll offer you, I'm mostly just going to read some excerpts from the book, but I'll offer you 3 keys for helping to unlock these excerpts and the book as a whole. The first is the psychoanalytic notion of free association, the patient's attempts to let their thought wander freely and untrammeled and without any censorship, and just to see what connections get made. The second is the idea of the cabinet of curiosities, these collections, especially from the 16th century, of curious objects that become co-located through no other principle than that they're all collected by the one collector. And then finally, the folly, the project laboured on in obscurity for years and years with probably very little value, and nonetheless completed. So that's what I'll say about the book in general. The first excerpt that I'll start with is actually a blog post, so it's written in my own voice, not in the voice of the editor, but it's quoted in the book. And it's about the story of the composition of a meme in the book that's written entirely in Yiddish. Incidentally, the image itself, because of copyright reasons, I didn't have permission to use the image, so I had to subject it to various forms of torture, and I think it actually made the book visually much more interesting than it would have been, so I was happy about that. So Robin says, what is your jüdischer Name, Batman? What's your Jewish name, Batman? Ruf mich Red Batman, Boychik Wunder. Call me Mr. Batman, Boy Wonder. And my jüdischer Name is Simcha Bunim, and my Jewish name is Simcha Bunim. So I'm reading this excerpt because I think it goes a long way to explaining the particular hold that the image had over me, and hence my obsession with it, really. And it's called The Savage Detectives and My Irascible Yiddish Expert. About 1 year ago, I had some contact with an onomast and linguist specializing in Jewish languages. I have been wanting to write more about that experience for some time, but have hesitated owing to ethical concerns that make it difficult. Concerns that arise from my irascible experts having forbidden me from publishing any part of their emails. Yes, you read that right. This expert ended by invoking the law, asserting their rights over the contents of their emails, and forbidding me from quoting anything from them. The whole episode was on the way to becoming quite upsetting to me when my partner enabled a gestalt switch that led me to find it both entertaining and enriching. This is like something out of The Savage Detectives, she said, referring to the Roberto Bolaño novel I was reading at the time. And it was a literary feud over esoteric scholarship, one party becoming more and more enraged precisely as the other party tries to assuage them. The affair was both heated and absurd. Here follows as much of the story as I can bring myself to relate. Jews have a practice of giving double names to their children, one a religious Jewish name, the other a secular one. Batman in the meme gives us his Jewish name, Simcha Bunim. But is Simcha Bunim a Jewish name, or is Simcha a Jewish name and Bunim a secular one? This was to be a major theme in the commentary on the meme, and in fact it is a major theme. But I was finding it hard to get good scholarly information on the nuances of this double naming practice. One expert on Jewish names whom I consulted suggested I contact the irascible expert. Tracking them down was not easy, but I eventually found a mailing address and wrote them a letter. Surprisingly, but as it turned out wholly in keeping with their generosity, they replied quite quickly by email, letting me know they had received my letter and would respond at greater length shortly. And so they did, offering a lot of very helpful material concerning the distinction between Jewish and secular names, including a passage I wish to quote in the commentary. The meme represents Yiddish in Roman letters, and another major theme in the commentary is the different methods used for doing this. The native orthography of Yiddish uses Hebrew letters. Since my correspondent was also an acknowledged expert on this topic, I decided, in my pushy way, to send them a couple of weeks later, and with the excerpt from their email incorporated, a draft of the entire commentary on the meme. I sent the commentary out to quite a few people at that point to get feedback. It is long, 17 or so pages, and a crazy mixture of scholarship, somewhere between mock and aspiring, a bibliography of the rabbinic works of my ancestors in the old country, and Batman-related nonsense. Reader, the expert read it. They were indeed the only person I had any reason at that time to believe did read it. I was overjoyed and so very, very grateful. Nor was my gratitude in any way diminished by the expert's opinion that my piece was so riddled with error as to be barely rectifiable. Since I cannot quote their verdict, let me give you some of my response. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to read my piece, and thank you also for your frank appraisal of its deficiencies, which I truly appreciate. I can't help but feel that your willingness to help me will put you in violation of the Yiddish proverb you cite, Afana machmen nitkin pelish. And here's a meme. Batman, I wrote this piece on your Jewish name. What do you think of it? It's riddled with errors. Afana machmen nitkin pelish. One doesn't write a commentary on a fool. As you can infer from my reply, the expert had, again I say with amazing generosity, offered to help me remove the errors from my wretched commentary. There was, however, a Faustian element to the bargain. I would have to promise in advance not to include anything they thought unworthy of publication and to include only what they thought to be correct. I explained at some length why I could not agree to this. The more general point I tried to convey was that although the scholarship in my commentary was important to me and I wanted it to stand up in its own right, nonetheless, my goals were not primarily scholarly but literary and philosophical. For example, in the commentary, I explain how the artist of the memes, that's me, arrived at the text that appears in the meme. That involved composing the text in English, putting it through Google Translate, and then getting help to put it into real Yiddish. I was able to recognize that what Google Translate had yielded was awful, but it served my purpose to include it in the story of how the final text was reached. But for the irascible expert, it was offensive to give any space to the obviously deficient output offered by Google Translate. Having audaciously made my case for why I wanted both the expert's help and the right to make my own decisions about the content of the commentary, I waited. I was hoping that the charm with which I explained all this, the playfulness of including a specially composed Batman meme incorporating the Yiddish proverb they threw my way, the slyness and subtlety of my whole project would win them over. I was a little boy trying to coax a stern and severe parent into indulgence. It was at this point, if I remember correctly, that my partner staged her Bologna-inspired intervention. And a good thing she did. The reply I received, far from manifesting the fondness I was trying to elicit, was now not just impatient and dismissive, but positively outraged and angry. The expert apparently had not previously read the commentary, but merely skimmed it. Now that they had read it properly, but how grateful I am that they did, after all, not just leave it skimmed, but read it properly, they found what I had written highly offensive. They felt I was poking fun at Yiddish by implying that there was something intrinsically funny about seeing Batman and Robin talking Yiddish. There would be nothing funny, the expert said, about seeing them talking French or German. So why should it be a source of humour to see them speaking Yiddish, a real language into which Shakespeare, Whitman, Einstein and many others have been translated? Would I also find a source of fun the articles of Kant and Hegel's scholarship written in Yiddish and published in Yiddish journals? It seems I had well and truly brought us to a pass in which I was Robin receiving a slap and the expert Batman delivering it. And who is to say I had not unconsciously aimed at just this? As I reflect on it now, I see how inappropriate my reply was to the expert's reaction to my shoddy scholarship. Could I realistically have thought they would be amused by the meme I made in their honour? What a misjudgment of tone on my part. So perhaps I was, after all, trying to provoke them. I wish I could quote from what I can only describe with but the tiniest exaggeration as the irascible expert's torrent of indignation and rage. Alas, I cannot. But here is my reply, the last salvo in this strange folie à deux. As always, thank you for your thoughtful engagement with my work. I am not sure why I have been so unsuccessful in communicating my ideas to you, but let me say categorically that it is not my intention in any way to make fun of Yiddish or its speakers. Quite the opposite. And then there's a whole lot more stuff I'm missing out. However, None of this is to say that I haven't myself been guilty of the thing you and I both condemn. I will have to think hard about whether I have unintentionally mocked Yiddish in saying that there was something humorous about seeing Batman and Robin speaking that language. I seem to have made things worse with every email I have sent you, and for that I am deeply sorry. I hope this email doesn't make things even worse. I approached you with respect in my heart, and I have admired your erudition and hope to learn from it, but I will certainly excise the quotation from your email and altogether stop bothering you. Even now, I sometimes find myself wishing I received some word from the irascible expert. It would hardly matter whether it was conciliatory or angry. If the former, I would have finally succeeded in replacing the slap with a loving caress. If the latter, my exciting and Bolaño-esque feud would continue. I have loved this irascible expert and love them still. They paid attention to me and they offered to help me. They saw something in me. I hope I have seen something in them too. Okay, so the thing that I'm going to read next is actually a commentary on the meme, so now on a meme. So now you'll be hearing the editor speaking about me, the artist, in the third person. And I'm choosing this commentary to read out because, first of all, it deals with a topic of some current interest, as you'll see, but also because it allows me to talk about the technical aspects of the memes and how the editor is concerned with those as well. So here's the meme. Robin is saying, "What's the matter, Batman?" And Batman says, "Nothing is the matter." And here's a reflection that says, "The matter is nothing." And the whole thing is called The Origins of Neoplatonist Metaphysics. From a technical point of view, this may be the most dazzling meme in the entire corpus. Evnine has taken Batman's head and speech bubble from a specially made meme with the image in its original orientation in the comic that it appears in. In fact, it has Batman on the left, not on the right. Inserted it into a mirror frame and rotated both frame and image at an angle which, while not actually possible, suggests the reflection while still allowing us to read it. A couple of other details will be mentioned in due course. To understand the content of the meme, we must go back to Evnine's early book, The Incoherence of the Incoherence. This is something I mentioned in some other commentaries. It includes the following self-contained passage, The Origins of Neoplatonist Metaphysics. Plotinus sat with a girl standing just in front of him. He said, or at least Porphyry said he said, for Porphyry being something of a voyeur was at that time concealed in the room, he said, "So if we strip off the accidents or qualities, or forms as Aristotle named them, such as colour," and by way of demonstration off came her scarf and jewellery, "texture," her skirts and petticoats, "height," her shoes, "extension," her farthingale, "figure or outline," her corset, "moistness," her underwear, "dryness," he cleared his throat. We are left with the matter in hand, as it were. He flushed. But then his face clouded with the memory of an unsolved philosophical problem. "What's the matter?" said the girl. He found the solution and his face cleared. "Oh, it's nothing, my dear, nothing at all," he said, and continued his exposition. From which incident, Porphyry was led to conclude that Plotinus held matter to be something with hardly any real existence, yet still a theoretical construct, as opposed to Gregory of Nyssa, who dispensed with this mystical pectin altogether and made his jam all from predicates, claiming implicitly that they needed nothing of which to be predicated. In another sense, this is exactly what Plotinus said, supposing that qualities were predicated of matter, and that matter was nothing, or rather a shadow, and on this shadow is traced a sketch, the world of appearance. So that's the end of the excerpt from the early book. Neoplatonism, so named only since the 19th century, is a phase in the history of ancient Plato-inspired philosophy that is taken to have emerged in the 3rd century CE with Plotinus. Plotinus' writings were collected after his death and published as the Enneads by his pupil and biographer Porphyry. In Evnine's vignette, we see Plotinus engaged in a studied mix of eros and philosophy. The intertwining of the two is itself, of course, a well-known theme of Platonic philosophy, as witnessed by Diotima's speech to Socrates in Plato's Symposium. Diotima there recounts to Socrates the true method of philosophy, ascending through erotic love to a higher form of love, exemplified in the pure contemplation of the forms, the immaterial source of what is only approximated in the world of mere appearance, the home of sexual desire. Porphyry is depicted as eavesdropping, but mishearing or misunderstanding what he hears. He thereby accidentally discovers one of Neoplatonism's fundamental assumptions, the unreality or lesser reality of matter. And here's a long footnote I'm going to read. A case of learning through inappropriate voyeurism is presented in another cultural tradition, roughly contemporaneous with Porphyry, the Talmud. In the Babylonian Talmud, we learn, quote, Rav Kahana entered and lay beneath Rav's bed. He heard Rav chatting and laughing with his wife and seeing to his needs, i.e. having relations with her. Rav Kahana said to Rav, the mouth of Rav is like one who has never eaten a cooked dish. That's to say his behavior was lustful. Rav said to him, Kahana, you are here? Leave, as this is an undesirable mode of behavior. Rav Kahana said to him, it is Torah and I must learn. Interestingly, this anecdote is inserted into a lengthy discussion concerning how, when and where one may defecate. Returning to Plotinus, his translator, Stephen McKenna, writes, he builds the soul a fairy palace. Enchanted, you follow him through the lovely labyrinthine structure. You mount breathless by successive stairways of the spirit, each more pure, more tenuous, more aspiring than the last. But sooner or later there comes a time when you ask yourself where the WC is. That's the end of the footnote. Evnine's sketch is quite cleverly done, but reading it now, one cannot help but feel how off it is. The double wordplay around matter, connecting its philosophical use with the two English idioms, the matter in hand and what's the matter, is clearly the linchpin of the scene. But the very young man, writing in the dark ages of the early 1980s, is completely oblivious to the sordor of the conjured encounter. Academia, as I write this in 2022, is still convulsing with the attempt to rid itself of sexual harassment and the sexualization of the teacher-student relationship. And in that context, one can hardly approve of Evnine's attempt at humour. I mentioned above Diotima's speech from the Symposium and the idea that pedagogy is somehow essentially erotic. The idea persists to this day. Here is Jane Gallup in her Feminist Accused of Sexual Harassment. At its most intense, and I would argue its most productive, the pedagogical relation between teacher and student is, in fact, a consensual amorous relation. And if schools decide to prohibit not only sex but amorous relations between teacher and student, the consensual amorous relation that will be banned from our campuses might just be teaching itself. In fact, Gallup seeks to make of the entanglement of sex and pedagogy a distinctively feminist strategy. She writes, it's because of the sort of feminist I am that I do not respect the line between the intellectual and the sexual. It seems to follow from this, am I being too literal, that if large parts of the population are not to be excluded from intellectual nurturing by a given teacher, that teacher must be pansexual, that their students must be attractive to them, and so on. Are unprepossessing students of the wrong gender simply to be denied an education by a particular teacher? What of the asexual or aromantic, either as students or teachers? Are they unable to experience pedagogy at its most productive? Evnine's scene is both better and worse than the kind of thing Gallup envisages. Better because it strips off the smugness, outcomes, I do not respect the line between the intellectual and the sexual, the co-optation of liberatory ideology, it is because of the sort of feminist I am, the erasure of asexuality might just be teaching itself, and leaves us with the bare matter at hand, amorous relations between teacher and student. Worse, because it evinces a perverse degree of objectification and absence of desire, notwithstanding the allusion to Plotinus's flushing and the evidence of the girl's arousal. It has its virtues, but is perhaps saved from being utterly cringeworthy only by its status as near juvenilia. We may return finally to the meme. The meme attempts to express the central joke of the written piece, the transition from the colloquial nothing is the matter to the Neoplatonist idea of matter as nothing, in its highly compressed and visual medium. This could have been done so as to maintain the device of misunderstanding what is heard. For example, using the original orientation of the image, so Batman on the left, Batman could have said, nothing's the matter, and Robin answered, what did you say? Matter is nothing? Instead, Evnine has chosen to do something far superior, to translate the mistake into a visual one. The trick is done through the insertion into the image of a mirror, presenting an imperfect reflection of Batman's words. One reason this is so clever is that Neoplatonism uses the metaphor of reflections, along with paintings and shadows, to represent the relation between the material world and the ideal immaterial world that is the home of true being. We see that in the final part of the Plotinus quotation above. In the meme, however, the usual hierarchy is deconstructed, since it is only through the reflection of Batman's words that the truth about the material world is seen. This subversion is emphasized by a detail almost too small to be noticed. If one enlarges the end of the text reflected in Robin's mirror, one sees this. Barely visible are 2 exclamation marks where the original has only 1. The mirror has thus, in a sense, increased rather than decreased reality, the reality of Batman's imperatival force. In fact, turning the joke into a visual one, because of its occurrence in the essentially visual medium of the meme, is only half the story. As I have noted in various places, the use of speech bubbles in the meme's template functions to represent what are spoken words via an image of their written representation. The reflection of the filled speech bubbles is therefore an image of an image, a shadow of a shadow, of the spoken reality. Offering a visual reflection of the speech bubble and its writing is metaphysically incongruous. First, it is not, even very approximately, a true visual reflection. It is what we might think of as a semantic reflection, inverting the order of words rather than the shape of the letters. But secondly, it treats something that is merely an artifact of the medium of representation, using a picture of words where the depicted scene includes only spoken words, as if it were part of the depicted scene itself. This is highlighted by Evnine in his decision to include in the mirror reflection not just the words in Batman's speech bubble, but also the speech bubble itself. And continuing in the same vein, he also includes the force lines arising from the impact of Batman's hand on Robin's cheek. Okay, so now I want to read something that also started life as a blog post, so again it's written in the first person. with my own voice. And this brings out two of the most important themes in the book, namely psychoanalysis and Judaism and their relation to each other. And it's called For the Letter Kills, but the Spirit Gives Life. 7 or so years ago, near the beginning of my analysis, I explained to my analyst, after some frustrating experiences, how important it was to me that they always engage with the actual content of what I was saying. I took a huge amount of care in expressing myself, choosing exactly the right words, multiplying distinctions in order to communicate with laser precision. And I didn't want to be interpreted before the letter of what I was saying had been fully attended to. Paul says in 2 Corinthians, distinguishing between Jews and the New Jesus movement, that the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And as a Jew, I have always understood that my job is to be for the letter. And here's my measurement on the By the letter, Paul means the Old Covenant, the Mosaic Law and its development by the rabbis of his day, whose views are recorded in the Mishnah. This he took to have been annulled by the advent of Jesus with a new covenant. Accordingly, the text of the Old Testament could no longer be read literally, but only spiritually by means of allegory, typology, and so on. The Jews were stubborn in continuing in the face of the new covenant to read their sacred books by the letter. So one part of being for the letter has been a determination to treat the language I am exposed to from other people literally and precisely, not to try and get the gist or spirit of it, not to look beyond it to see where its originator is coming from. But there is, alongside this, another way of being for the letter. Rabbi Akiva, a near contemporary of Paul's, was said to interpret mounds of rules from every tip of the letters. The tips were ornamental crowns that adorned the Hebrew script at the time. You can see those. This type of reading, truly and radically literal, perhaps we should say letteral, can stand as a synecdoche for a panoply of more or less perverse methods of interpretation associated with the Jews. In the words of John Wilkins, the 17th century inventor of a real character, an ideal language which mirrors the structure of reality, amongst the Jewish rabbis is not any opinion, whether in nature or policy, whether true or false, but some of them, by a Kabbalistical interpretation, can father it upon a dark place of Scripture, or if need be upon a text that is clean contrary. There being not any absurdity so gross and incredible, for which these abusers of the text will not find out an argument. So Jews were taken to task under the guise of the letter for being both too literal and too fanciful. I have endeavoured to honour these twin heritages, a laborious literalism with respect to what I read and write, hear and say, and an extravagant letteralism, a willingness to associate anything with anything by means of some devious chain, to father monstrous conjunctions of words and meanings through textual abuse. Those 7 or so years ago, when I implored my analyst to take me at my word, it was almost needless to say only the first way, according to which it contrasts with spirit, that I had in mind. 2 or 3 years after that, well into the analysis, I was becoming more comfortable and more curious. The tight control over my words, the only real power I could exert to protect myself and ensure the analysis did not unleash anything too scary, came to feel constricting, even suffocating. It was, I suppose, a Damascene moment. I relented and gave my analyst permission to listen to the spirit of my words and report back on what they heard. I have no reason to think my analyst's behaviour was in any way affected by either my initial injunction or my subsequent permission. It was around that time that I composed this animated meme, and this is the meme to which this forms part of the commentary. Fast forwarding the analysis to last week and a very exhausting and dispiriting session. At the end of the previous session, I had said I thought my presence in our sessions was now very different from how it used to be. My analyst agreed, adding that they too were a different analyst now from what they had been. The next day I said that I would love, if not now then perhaps towards termination, to hear about the ways in which they thought they had changed as an analyst during the course of my treatment. When my analyst asked what exactly I wanted them to explain, we set off on a frustrating tussle lasting the whole session, in which I said over and over again, in every way I could think of, what I wanted, and my analyst kept alleging that they didn't understand. Somehow, I kind of got through, and my analyst conveyed how their attempt to hear the question behind the question kept them from seeing what I wanted to communicate. At the end, I exclaimed, I'd like to go back to that injunction I made right at the start. Please make an effort to engage with the letter of what I am saying before trying to hear what is unsaid. To which they replied, with some subsequently confessed hyperbole, you do realise that is literally the exact opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing. One reason to think that the designation of psychoanalysis as the Jewish science may be misleading. In some sense, of course, what they said is obvious. They are listening for what is unconscious, which is unlikely to be found in the obsessively controlled language that I wield almost like a weapon. But it startled me nonetheless, and I decided to write this post to help work through it. Okay, so one very short final meme with its commentary, and then I'll finish. So, this is the meme. Batman will even you die someday, only when I'm very old, Robin, and you'll be all grown up by then. Adam West, who portrayed Batman in the 1960s TV series, died on June 9th, 2017, 2 days before this meme was composed and posted on Facebook. There can be no doubt that it was intended as a tribute to him. The meme has great pathos, owing, I think, to the discrepancy between Robin's age and the much younger manner in which he expresses himself. Robin sounds like a child of 6 or 7, beginning to confront the reality and the universality of death. Batman plays the role of the loving parent, attempting, but inevitably failing, to make this unacceptable fact acceptable. The slap, so at odds with the love and care Batman exhibits towards Robin in his words, love and care he exhibits nowhere else in Evnine's memes, actualizes the way in which no amount of tenderness can mitigate the slap in the face that is death. And with that I'll end. If people have any questions or comments, I'd be delighted to hear.
Please, questions. Let me take this and pass it around.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm loud enough, but like... it's just a Pakistani thing. First of all, I just wanted to say, an academic / philosopher who's, obsessed with the Batman meme. I felt like I'm in a Coen Brothers movie right now. The experience, the question I wanted to ask was, so the first person who was introducing, I suppose her name was Alex, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, so she said something about the book also exploring themes of alternatives to academia and alternative approaches to academia. That's one subject that's I'm really interested in, because of all the doomer conversations that we have surrounding academia right now, this is the end of the road and stuff like that. So I just wanted some comments, some clarity, more clarity regarding what are some of the themes that within this book that address that.
Good, thanks. That's a great question. Obviously this is not like a regular philosophy book, so its mere existence as a philosophy book, because I do think of it as a philosophy book, is stepping outside the usual tracks. But I also I speak third personally about myself in some of the commentaries about the ways in which I feel I've become less and less willing to just do the things that are expected academically. I shouldn't be saying this in front of my colleagues. That it's come to feel more and more constricted for me. And so writing this book was an attempt to try to break out of some of what felt so constricting to me. And I talk a bit about the way in which philosophy is done without the presence of the human face, and I relate that to the image of, rather than standing away, being slack, like as if a reinvigorating slack to the discipline that can't offer itself with a human face. So I don't know that I have a lot to say about it, but I have a lot to express about it.
Are there questions? Yeah.
Here's a mic for you. Okay.
I'm not a philosopher, but Marshall McLuhan taught us that the medium is the message. And Walter Benjamin taught us that mechanical reproduction is dehumanizing. Okay, so the meme, I'm pretty sure the meme existed before digital technology and digital media, but it could not triumph and flourish the way it does. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the effect of digital media and digital technology upon art, upon people, upon existence.
Yeah, well, that's a very big question. First of all, let me say that one of the memes is about the medium is the message, and expresses a lot of my frustration in trying to understand what that means. So, when you say he taught us this, I might bawl straight away at that. Yeah, I mean, when I started making these memes, it was about 7 years ago, and it was because I liked the image so much. Every time I saw it, it gave me a kind of jolt of satisfaction. And, I mean, for personal reasons that you've seen a little bit of, but I talk about at much greater length also in the book. And then I realized at some point I could make them myself. I had no idea that there were these meme generators. But I mastered that. And I started just making them obsessively and posting them on Facebook. And the idea for the book came about because many of the memes are quite esoteric and I wasn't explaining them. And I thought, well, when I've finished, I'll just bring them all together and explain it. So my original conception of the book was as... it was going to incorporate a lot more of the interaction that I had with people on Facebook about the memes. There is a little of that left. Most of it got taken out, but it was going to be much more like that. And I even had a fantasy that maybe Facebook would publish the book. But I mean, yeah, digital art and digital technology, of course, they're changing us in all sorts of ways, but I don't think I've got anything intelligent to say about that. It's too difficult for me.
So this conversation leads me to start to wonder what your thinking is in terms of the debate about consciousness. But I also think that related to Deleuze's theories, which are maybe a little bit passé, maybe, but to me it all comes together in the idea that as human beings we try to make sense of things that maybe ultimately are nonsensical, and you alluded to that as well.
Yes. I think that's absolutely right, and I think that many of the memes I identify as just being absurd because there's no connection between the slap and what's going on. In others there is. But in some of them it is mystifying why anything is happening or what's supposed to be going on. So it is definitely I definitely have in mind the difficulties of trying to make sense of things.
Do a little hike around the book stand here.
I just saw your shirt. Sorry it took me so long.
Thanks a lot, Simon. So I had a question about how you envision this book operating on the reader, and whether your conception of that itself evolved over time. Because it's kind of a platitude that any reader will approach any given text with likely only a partial capacity to make it accessible for themselves because of their idiosyncratic background or learning or what have you. But this book seems especially prone to being inaccessible to a large number of readers in various ways. I mean, it will be accessible, but it seems as though this is a book that's quite fascinating because, in the limit, it's probably only largely comprehensible by one person, which is you.
In fact.
And so I'm wondering how you envision the experience that the reader might have with the book,
yes.
And what you think the virtues and vices of that might be.
Yes, that's a good question. So one of the things that I learned about myself through the course of this analysis, and partly also through writing the book, is how much of a desire I have to control my reader's experience. And that's not a good thing. I mean, it's a form of sadistic domination. And I think, we ought in some way to encourage the reader's anarchy with respect to the author's designs. And I think, and I write about this in the book too, that clarity, which has been so important for me in my career, and I'll tell you, like, every single manuscript I've submitted or every single review of things I've written always mentions clarity. Never says profound or interesting. It's always very clear. So I have been marked with the sign of clarity for my entire life, and that, not without reason, because it's been hugely important to me. But I came to see that clarity is part of the attempt to colonize the reader's mind, not to leave them free to move off on paths of their own. And so this book, in some way, I think, tries to rectify that desire just by pushing all this stuff at them with no instructions about what to do with it, and let people get whatever they can out of it. I don't want people not to get things out of it. I think you say it's inaccessible, and some parts of it are quite difficult, I suppose, but other parts are supposed to be just pleasant and funny, and so I hope that many different kinds of readers could find something in it. But yes, I'm aware that I really have no idea what people will make of it.
Further questions?
Can I ask one last question?
Sure.
In the introduction, we were told, among other things, that this book is a queer book. How in the world is it queer? Unless apart from the fact that Batman and Robin are clearly gay, but how is it a queer book?
This was Alex's use of the word, not mine, so perhaps I should ask her. I would not have said that about my own book, but do you want to speak to that?
I can say something about that, yeah, sure. Yeah, I think what I had in mind by queer was basically Tara Ahmed's idea of queerness, the queer use of artifacts, as well as...
For going against the grain.
Right, and the idea that it's kind of non-normative, right? So it goes against kind of different types of normativity, including disciplinary norms. So, it's a queer in a broad kind of theoretical sense.
I do also talk about Batman and Robin's relationship.
Oh, and also strange. Queer and the strange.
Right. Thank you.
Any further questions for Simon? Well, I should point out that there are a number of copies of the book so that you can engage in your own anarchic interpretation behind the counter over there. And Simon would be. There are all sorts of markers in there, so Simon can inscribe.
I would be happy
so
to.
Check it out. The book is priced to move, So thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
see you all, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.